I'll be doing some light spoilers for Monogatari, Land of the Lustrous, Madoka Magica, ReZero, and Steins Gate. All great shows, and all shows that I think deserve a good watch before being spoiled in a video like this. So yeah, just to be fair, this is a warning, so yeah. Overpowered characters can be really annoying in any narrative. Oftentimes, these characters feel less like characters and more like power sponges that just keep on getting stronger for no good reason. For me, it's no fun following a cast of really broken characters basically bullying the world around them. Sure, it can be a good power ride for those that want that, but they don't really add much in the overall story for me. But this doesn't apply to every OP character. And to have some kind of a starting point, I'd like to draw from a power that I think can be universally agreed to be quite overpowered. Immortality. Immortality can be a very interesting attribute when done correctly. I found that there are a plethora of cases where immortality has been used that allows for great characters and stories. Instead of using their OP powers to move the plot in some artificial way, their immortality is used in a way that makes them relatable while also digging deep at the negative implications of having these powers. In this way, it draws and questions human philosophy despite being so inhuman and detached. Some of these characters can be technically killed, but for the most part can't age or die in a way that us normal humans can. And I'll also be talking about powers that allow them to feign immortality in a way that a god might, by practically controlling the outcome of the universe. One of my favorite shows of all time features conveniently an immortal main character, but I think it's more appropriate to call Araragi's immortality half-immortality. He is only half vampire, and definitely not as powerful in all departments as Shinobu. But by all means in the show, he is practically immortal, and his abilities are not to be ignored. He wastes no time in using his immortality in almost every situation he can, to the point where that's almost always a part of the solutions. But that doesn't mean that Araragi is any more happy about all the things he's done. In fact, the more the series progresses, the more he finds faults in how his problems are solved, and the more he becomes critical of himself. Despite how powerful he is from the standpoint of being immortal, he is otherwise a very weak person. His immortality doesn't fix his inherent flaws, and it doesn't fix the way he sees himself. It doesn't fix his past, and it doesn't fix the present. Despite being able to do anything he wants with no consequences, that doesn't give him a free pass and also being the best person in the world. He is a person first before he is an immortal, and him having these powers doesn't outright change his personality or make him any less of a character. And that's kind of the point I find that immortality is used in Monogatari. It's not to outline Araragi as this person who's actively seeking oddities and fixing all the problems in this town because he can, but it contrasts Araragi's own mental state. He sees himself a lot worse than he really should. He practically has no self-esteem, but his immortality is something that gives him an avenue to feel powerful. It offsets his own mental state, but at the same time, his immortality also gives him a place to contemplate his actions and draw out his insecurities. If he had none of the powers he does, if he couldn't dive face first into every problem he has, would he still do the things he does? Would he still be able to face these problems? Honestly, I don't think Araragi has it in him, and even if he does, he'll just die and accomplish nothing. And that sucks too, and I think Araragi knows this. It's the cliche of great powers come great responsibilities, except not everyone who has great powers would necessarily have the mental fortitude for great responsibilities. Having immortality is great and all, especially in the world of Monogatari, but is that worth having in spite of your humanity? Having these powers and properly using them requires a certain fortitude and requires becoming someone different, someone else. Araragi isn't human, and he will always have this disconnect with those around him because he refuses to lose himself completely. If he were to fully embrace his immortality, that would mean coming to terms with all his flaws and losing his human self, his humility. But he doesn't, and he struggles so much on the line of coming to terms with who he is as a person despite not being able to be a person at all. Another instance of pseudo-immortality is from a very recent and a very great show, Land of the Lustrous. In the show, all the characters are immortal gems, but why I say pseudo is because being gems, they can be broken and taken away for an indefinite period of time. Many characters exhibit nonchalance towards this fact, and despite being shattered or hurt, nearly shrug it off. Many of these characters have been alive for hundreds of years, doing basically the same thing, fighting Lunarians. That's all that's been happening all of these years. No real technological advances, no real expansion, just a life of constant fighting. As immortals, what more can they do than to occupy their time with the closest and most immediate form of action? And they do so willingly, without asking questions, slaves to their immortality. But they're still humanized. Many characters are attached to one another, but it isn't necessarily a fear of death, but a fear of being left alone and losing someone for a prolonged period of time. After all, if one of them gets captured, who knows how long it'll be before they're able to salvage them back. They can't die, but imprisoning them is still an option, and that can last forever and even be worse than death. Some characters have spent centuries just waiting for their partners to come back, and some have only recently experienced what it's like to have someone be stripped away and be unable to do anything, despite their detachment from pain and life and, being immortal. They have all the power in the world, an army of immortal gems trained for combat, and yet they can be shattered and stolen just as easily. Their power isn't as great as they think, they aren't as strong as they want to be. Even immortals have their limits. And it takes a tragedy like losing one of their fellow gems that allows them to have this realization. By virtue of being gems and giving them realistic values of hardness, their overpoweredness is easily brought down a peg, allowing the idea of their immortality to take on another role of showing off this deep-seated attachment that they have for one another. Being immortals as they are, they can live on forever, but the only other people that they'll ever be able to have in their lives are each other, and cherishing the company of one another is inherently something that social beings like us do. It's very human and very relatable. But another part of Landed Illustrious's solution of balancing immortal characters is their loss of memory. This goes hand in hand with their want to feel together. Every time their parts are replaced, so are their memories. This is most prominent with foes. This allows for an immortal like foes to still have character development despite being so powerful in her own right. In gaining strength, she also loses memories. Things that for immortals like her are probably the only thing she really values and really holds as her own. In a life of constant fighting, with nothing else to do, individual experiences are the only things one can turn to. And to lose that is to further their slavery to their immortality, and to further lose their sense of being. And that's what happens to foes, who transitions from her old naive carefree self to this stone cold version who's seen more than what she can handle. To get to the point where she is now, a lot has been sacrificed, and being immortal as she is, these memories will continue to stay with her indefinitely. She'll never be able to forget the things that pain her so much for as long as she lives, which is forever. And if she does want to forget, she'll be further stripping herself of her identity, literally losing herself in the process. In the end, what's the point of being immortal for her if her solution to all the pain is to continually lose herself? At what point has it gone too far, and has she lost too much of herself to even enjoy being alive? And will she even remember the good times and the good memories that were attached with all the bad as well? That's a really interesting conundrum that pops up. This last section isn't necessarily about immortal characters, but due to the circumstances, they are playing God and are breaching the limits of death. For example, Subaru in ReZero. He can still die, and he still does, but because he can rewind time upon death, he takes on this immortal status. He never truly dies since he comes back and is chilling again. What this allows him to do is everything. He can play his game of life until he finds the right answer. But that also kind of sucks, because in doing so, any memories he's made, any relationships, any experiences he had with others are lost upon his reset. Any moments he may have had with those he cared about can be turned into his own delusions the moment he dies. After all, has anything he's ever done really constituted to anything if it all resets in his next timeline? What's the point in doing anything and sustaining any of these moments when it can all be stripped away at the drop of a hat? It's existential questions like this that riddle his experience of immortality. And he dies a lot, to the point where he kind of becomes a psychopath. He has to remember every gut-wrenching failure by himself. It makes Subaru's otherwise very overpowered power very meaningful and grounded. He is still affected by his strength, and he isn't invincible by any means. His greatest weakness is his own immortality. What can he do if he slowly loses the will, and if he slowly becomes more deranged? It allows his overpowered sense of bravado to break down and lead to development. Similar powers also go to Homura from Madoka and Okabe in Steins Gate. The only difference is that they have choice in deciding to reset the universe. But the results are very similar. They have to constantly watch as their efforts are wasted and their despair grows. And all of that accumulated did a pretty good number on their mental state. Despite having this almost godlike power, the greatest weakness and obstacle that they had to overcome was themselves, and to keep pushing forward despite their powers giving them nothing but more pain. And it is with how overpowered their powers are that allows them to have these moments of development that they would otherwise not have. Their pseudo-immortality, to be able to control the universe around them and prevent not only their own deaths but whoever they so choose, is flawed by nature since it is under their hands to control. I think that's really the core of it, that these powers are under their control. Their immortality is something that they can't just ignore forever, it's something that they are conscious of. It eats at them as much as having any regular power does. It allows us to see that they are people in the end, and that their problems are not any more different than what anyone else feels. We can see Araragi's struggles to deal with himself and coming to terms with himself. We can see Foes and the other gems struggle with confiding their eternal time with each other and cherishing their memories that are so fragile. We can see the pains and existentialism and pointlessness that arises when people like Subaru, Homura, and Okabe go through when they try countless times with their seemingly godlike status and produce no results. But in the end, as immortal as they are, the one thing that allowed them to finish their stories and to see the endings they sought for was their own human will, something that never left them despite how inhuman they may have become.